I'd like to call this meeting to order. Will the secretary please call the roll?
Mrs. Chu?
Here.
Mr. Sismar?
Here.
Mr. Hong?
Here.
Mrs. Lax?
Here.
Mrs. Reese?
Here.
Mr. Seeler?
Here.
Mr. Simmons? Mr. Winston?
Here.
And President Becker. Sorry, President Baker's long gone. President Becker.
Call me anything you like. Becker's here, and we have a quorum. Please, let's rise to salute the flag.
Thanks, Barney.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The New Jersey Open Public Meeting Law was enacted to ensure the right of the public to have advance notice of and to attend meetings of public bodies. In accordance with the provisions of this act, the East Brunswick Board of Education has caused notice of this meeting to be published by having the date, time, and place thereof posted at the Board of Education offices. Written notice was also provided to the Sentinel, the Newark Star-Ledger, the Home News and Tribune, and the Municipal Clerk of East Brunswick. All Board of Education meetings, with the exception of executive session discussions, are videotaped for later broadcast. It is the policy of the Board of Education that videotape meetings are not edited for any purpose, and individuals who speak at the board's public meetings should be aware of those videotaping rules. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And by the way, a former superintendent used to he gave up and just called me Becky, because it was kind of a combination of Vicky and Becker. So he would just be Becky and I'd be yes, so it's call me whatever you'd like. Okay, speaking of call me whatever you'd like, we have a presentation tonight, and that is the fiscal year 2019-20 tentative budget presentation. Mr. Juliat.
Good evening, everyone. So, it is that time. We've been talking about budget for a couple of months now, and it is time for the board to be adopting a tentative budget. And the operative word here is tentative. This is essentially the budget that gets established for purposes of discussion with the public, and upon which there will be a public hearing. And I'll go over some dates later in the presentation. This is going to be a very high-level overview of the budget. But between now and the final adoption of the budget, there is ample opportunity for the board to have conversation, discuss what's in the budget. Most of what's in the budget will not change just because of the nature of the business. But there will be opportunities to look at what might change and make those recommendations and obtain consensus, and then ultimately arrive at a final budget. So with that said, what are the factors impacting the bottom line? And there are always set factors that do have an impact. One is state aid, not knowing whether state aid will go up, remain the same, or go down, and we've had all of that happen over the years. I'll show you where we stand with that. There is a 2% cap on the tax levy. That is by law. And occasionally there are opportunities where, based on enrollment, that the 2% cap gets an exception for banked cap, and it's based on enrollment growth. But generally it's a 2% cap that is what governs the tax levy. Budgeted fund balance is what we anticipate to be available, being left over, not having been spent from the prior year's budget, and what gets carried over to help balance the subsequent year's budget. So one of the things that's important is that in any particular year, we need to be able to generate those kinds of funds. And one of the things that we do during the course of the year is we do implement a spending freeze so that we can monitor what would be essentially only essential spending, and then ensure that we are generating the necessary funds to help balance the subsequent year's budget. And enterprise operations, and that would be our facilities use, the JM PAC in particular, and also the community programs enterprise. There are funds that come out of those enterprises to help offset the budget. So those are very integral. Without those revenue sources, we would have a significant gap to have to bridge. In expenditures, again, as I said earlier, just high level, but one of the things that is important is the continuation and maintaining a continuation of our high-quality educational services. It's certainly what attracts folks to East Brunswick. Collective bargaining, what are the results of our collective bargaining, past contracts, future contracts, and how do we allow for those settlements to be funded within the budget. Special education services and out-of-district tuition, those are mandatory provisions that we have to comply with, and they certainly have an impact on the bottom line. Our mandated charter school payments, I'll talk a little bit further on that, and health benefits. And as I said, this is high level. There are many other aspects, but these are some of the more significant cost impacts upon the budget. And certainly enrollment changes, and as we've been talking over the months, going back to December, we've seen significant enrollment changes at the elementary level. Last time we had a conversation on that, a couple of meetings ago, we had increased roughly about 265 students since this time last year in doing our projections for the current year. So that's a significant growth. That growth at the elementary level is larger than Bow-Monroe School. So just to kind of put in perspective, that is more than the number of students we have in Bow-Monroe School. State aid. We've been on a roller coaster with state aid over the years, and I'm giving you a historical perspective here. 2008, 2009, our state aid benchmark was at $20 million. We had a significant cut in 2009-10, and then a much more significant cut in the year after that, in 2010-11, which brought us down to $13.8 million. Since then, we've seen some increases. We've seen years where there have been no increase, and all the way through until this year's tentative budget for the fiscal 2020 year, we are just getting back to the level that we were 11 years ago. So that's good news that our state aid is going up for next year, but yet again, keep in mind that we are just back to the level that we were 11 years ago, where we otherwise would be at a much higher level. Now the state is making changes in state aid formulas and calculations, and how that will impact us. We're hopeful that it will be in a positive way over the next couple of years. In terms of mandated charter school payments, in 2010-11, that's when we were hit with a significant increase in our charter school obligations with the opening of the Hatikva Charter School in town, and that had a significant effect upon the budget with a one-time adjustment for mandatory payments to the charter school of $1,200,000. And since then, it had increased every year. What we're seeing for 2020 is a slight decrease in those payments. It is 1 year. It is 1 year that the school is not expanding in its grade levels, and certainly enrollment has a factor in that as well. So we're seeing a slight decrease of about $180,000 in those mandated payments. So where is our tentative budget? We have to have a balanced budget, and we've been working on balancing that budget for quite some time now, and we have arrived at a balanced budget after numerous meetings with the Finance Committee, and we have an estimated revenue of $156.9 million. Our appropriations of a like amount. We have no excess revenue or shortfall at this moment in the tentative budget, and overall reflecting a just slightly over a $2 million increase in the tax levy for the general fund. That, by the way, is below the 2% cap by $500,000. So the tentative budget includes ongoing support and some improvement to instructional programs. It supports the co-curricular and athletic activities of the district, so there are no changes there. Ongoing technology investment, we heard some of that at the last board meeting with regard to the initiative at the high school level. And one of the things that we're always looking at is how can we mitigate costs just in general, and try to do that on a regular basis across the board. Our public hearing is scheduled for April 25th. It is a legally mandated process to have a public hearing, and there is a specific time frame within which that must occur. We are set for April 25th. So between now and April 25th, we can certainly have conversations, we can make changes, and then present those at a public hearing. And then we have a final adopted budget scheduled for May 9th. Again, there is a fixed period of time within which that must occur. My recommendation, because if there are changes, and it's not just a matter of making changes to the budget document that you all have, but they all have to run satisfactorily through the Department of Education's budget system. And there are various checks and balances and computations that are necessary. So ideally, we really should know where we are, if there are going to be any changes, I would say by April 30th, so that we can ensure that we have time to process through the state system and make sure that there are no errors in the kind of editing that they look for, various quality assurances in and where costs are and so forth. So those are the overall timeframes. Budget information availability, as is our practice. We will make the information available on the district's website beginning sometime tomorrow. The website will be updated, and essentially what we provide to the public is exactly what the board receives in its budget books. And there we have it for high-level overview on the budget. Thank you.
Okay, next we have for the good of the cause for the public, the Board of Education recognizes the value of public comment in educational issues, the importance of providing an opportunity to the public to express themselves, to allow for a fair and orderly public comment period, and in accordance with board bylaws, individual comments are limited to 5 minutes. Members of the public are reminded that this is a public televised meeting of the Board of Education, and to protect the privacy of all students and staffs, concerns regarding individual students and staff members should generally be addressed by first meeting with the appropriate administrative staff. Is there anyone choosing to wish to address the board tonight? Seeing none, I will close the public portion and go to our sole action item tonight. Can I please have a motion for Financial Services School District tentative budget adoption for fiscal year 2020?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Lax.
Second.
Second by Mrs. Chu. Is there any discussion? Li Wu.
Yes. So for the state aid, this year by number only, we reached the number to 2008 and 2010. But for the past 11 years, if we factor in the consumer price index, that means the state of New Jersey has now given us the same amount of money as they did 11 years ago. I just want the public to know that we're working very hard to get the balanced business, the balance of budget, but we still want the state of New Jersey to give us more.
That's an excellent point, Li Wu. Even in the years where we had what's called flat funding, where we didn't receive a decrease, we didn't receive an increase in the year before, it wasn't flat funding, it was a decrease, because the cost of everything always goes up year to year. So whatever we would spend on one year, if we receive the same amount of money the next year, it doesn't buy as much. I mean, we all see this in our home budgets, and it's the same thing here. So that's an excellent point. Thank you. Any other discussion? Will the secretary please call the roll?
Mrs. Chu.
Yes.
Mr. Sismar.
Yes.
Mr. Hahn.
Yes.
Mrs. Lax.
Yes.
Mrs. Reese.
Yes.
Mr. Seeler.
Yes.
Mr. Winston.
Yes.
President Becker.
Yes, motion carried. Next, I have a motion to go into closed session The Board of Education must discuss matters which are not appropriate for discussion in a public meeting, whereas those items so listed on tonight's agenda. Whereas the length of the closed session is estimated to be 3 hours, after which the public meeting of the board shall reconvene and action will be taken. Now be it resolved that the East Brunswick Board of Education will recess into closed session.
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Lax, second by Mrs. Reese. Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. Good night. Thank you.
Here we go.